Hi, Ernie.
Okay. Hi, Harold.
Where are we? Pay Zion?
Let's take a look. 1 second. No. Pay Ches.
Oh,
88.
okay.
When you have produce, it's not obligated in giving Trumas and Meisers until certain things happen. So it has to be brought into the house through a door. That's called Pnei Abayis. If you bring it through a window or a roof, it would not be chayiv Trumas and Meisers yet. Shenemer biarti hakodesh min habayis. So it's got to be in the house. No. Once you bring the produce into a chotzer, a courtyard, that's enough. Shenemar ve'achlu bish arecha. The savir sharecha is like chotzer. Rav Yechanami aksiv min habayis. Amlucha chotzer do mi the bayis. Chotzer is like a house. Ma bayis amishtamer. A house is watched. Av chotzer mishtameres. Rav Yana nami aksiv bisharecha. Rav Yana, why doesn't he say chotzer? Because he needs that ahumaboyle the ma'ayle derech shar. If you went into the house through a shar, that'll work. It'll be chayiv. Lafuke derech gagas for karpefs is the law. But if you're bringing it through a roof or a window, it would not work. Mostly from Chanina Chuzah. Kanafshacha. This is talking about when the worker can eat produce in the field. It has to be similar to the way an owner eats. A regular owner of a field, he can go into his field and eat an achilas, a temporary eating, snack from a tree, and there's no chiyuv meiser. Av nafshel pol oichelu potter. Haloikeach chayiv, which comes to if somebody comes to purchase produce from a farmer, the guy who purchases it has to give trumas and meisers. And my lab, even if the purchaser is besodeh, not even in a house, before bringing it into a chotzer, Rav Papa, no. That's by a worker who's eating b'te'ena omeres begina v'nofenot l'chotzer askinan. It's a fig tree outside, but its branches are hanging into a chotzer. Now, Ulabanda Amar Labayis, the one who says that it's only chayiv trumas meisus once it goes into a bayis, the fig tree was sort of hanging over a house. The achi balabayis tam in the chayiv. So why only a poel? Why not the balabayis? Balabayis ain't a betenoso. He's interested in the fig tree, which is not in the house. The purchaser is interested in the figs. And those are already in the house or the chotzer because they're leaning over. So the Gemara asks, a purchaser, is he chayiv once he buys it? Batanya. Why did the markets of Beis Hino, which was a suburb of Yerushalayim, were they destroyed shalosh shanim kodem Yerushalayim, before the Churban? They didn't accept rabbinic law. Chanyu oimrim, aser taser, as called to us zarecha yotzei masadeh shana shana, v'achalta lifnei Hashem lokecha. Aser taser v'achalta, v'lo mocher. The seller is potter because he doesn't eat from the grain. Only a purchaser does. Tvua zarecha v'lo lokeach. Now here, midin Torah, the Chachami made a drasha that even a purchaser doesn't do it. Midin Torah, the lokech is not chayv b'afreshus meisers. Ella, really, the din that a lokech has to give trumas meisers is really midrabanan. What's with the pasuk? Asmach cross, mach the balma. It's just something to lean on. So kenafsha cholamai asa. What is it when it says the poil has to be like the owner? L'chedetanya. Kenafshacha. Ma nafshacha. Im chasanta. So you're not allowed to muzzle your animal when the animal is threshing. Now, if the owner muzzled himself and he didn't eat, there's no isser of lo sachsom shorbedisho. Poel gal also of poel chasamto potter. If you prevent a poel from working, there's also from eating while he's working. He hasn't violated the isser of lo sachsom shorbedisho. Masif marzutra. Ezeu gorna. What is considered the time of the goren, where the produce is ripened, and now you can put them in a silo, and then they're obligated in maisrus? So it depends. Bikishur muvadiluin, that's zucchini and gourds, mishi yavkasu. Amravasi, what is that? Mishanitel pikishlem. There's like a certain flour that falls off, that dries up, and that's a simon that is ripe. My love, Mishiyivkasu, even besode, not necessarily in the house or the courtyard. Lo, Mishiyivkasu babayis. It has to happen in the house. Ihachi, why would you say Mishiyivsaku? You would say Achiyivsaku maboile. So Itana Achiyivsku avamina adigomer levikisu. I would think until all the leaves fall off. Kamash Malon, no, Mishiyivsku askuli pikisai. It's only the beginning process. When the first dried leaves falls off of the grain, that's a simon that it's right. Masif Marzuta Beit Rav Nachman. Gorno l'maiser l'chayv mishum tevel. When is grain considered to have reached the status of goren, to become obligated in meiser, and otherwise it's tevel? If you don't do it, tigmar melachton. When the malacha with that produce is finished. Now, what is ezer gmar malachton? Meleches hachnasasa. We're talking about bringing the produce in for storage. Now, my lav hachnasasa, even in the field, like you see, haystacks and things like that, where you store it. More says low. Hachnasasa labayis zeu gmar malachton. Bringing it into the house is the gmar malach. The boy seima. Kikom Rav Yanai, when the Rav Yanai say that the choivus meiser is only when you bring it into the house, that's bezeisim vanovim. Grapes and olives you cannot store in a silo. The lav negorin in it. You bring it into wherever you store grapes or olives, but wheat and barley, avachit nusor and goren badeksiv bei. They themselves are chayiv meiser once you gather them up, even before you put them in the chatzar bayis, because they've already reached the status of goren. Fine. Ashkechan Adam, we learned about a worker who works by an employer, that he's allowed to eat b'mechuber lakarka. He cannot eat things that have been plucked yet, but he can eat things that are connected to the ground. Sure. An ox that's threshing eats betolush. If it's already been picked and he's threshing it, he's allowed to eat it because you're allowed to muzzle lo sachsham shor b'disho. Adam, who's allowed to eat while he's working, betolush minolan, can he eat things that have been plucked? I would say kal v'chomer mishor. Umashor she'ena oichel b'mechuber. An ox cannot eat if it's connected to the ground. Oichel betolush, but he eats when he's threshing. Adam she'oichel b'mechuber. We just learned that a worker is allowed to eat from a tree, an apple tree. Ein odin she'oichel betolush. He should certainly be able to eat fruit that's been picked. So we can break the kal v'chomer. Mala shor, shekenat ha-mitzvah al chasimoso. There is a prohibition. You're not allowed to muzzle your shore and prevent it from eating. If you put a muzzle on your worker, there's no lav. So perhaps there's a stringency by shore. So how do you know, asks the Gemara, that you have no prohibition of muzzling a person? We're going to learn a kal v'chomer back to a person from a shore. You have no obligation to keep an ox alive. You see an ox that doesn't have food. You have tsar balei chayim, but you have no obligation to keep him alive. But you are not allowed to muzzle him when he's threshing. A Jewish person, if he's poor, you can't let him starve. You have to feed him. So certainly I would think you're not allowed to muzzle him when he's working. So there's a pasuk. Amar kra kenafshecha. Kenafshe shel poil. Ma nafsho a balabayis im chasamto potur. If he muzzles himself, he's not over the lav. So at poil im chasamosto potur. So he's similar to the poil. So there's no kal v'chomer. So again, we ask the question: Adam b'tolush minolan. Where do we learn that a human worker working in a field can eat from produce that's been picked? Amar kro kamo shtei pa'amim. It says, ki savo b'kamas reyacha. If you enter a field where there is standing grain, lo tanif al kamas reyach. Im eino inin lo adam b'mechuber. Now we already know that he's allowed to eat from trees, from apples that are still in the trees. Tneu inyan lo adam b'tolush. This is the heter that a worker can eat fruit that's already been picked. Ravami Omar, a different reason. Adam b'tolush lo tzarich kra. You don't need a pasuk to tell you that an adam can eat picked fruit, because it says, "Ksiv ki savo b'kerem reyacha." You go in the vineyard, v'achalta anovim, milo askinon shesachu lekatev. For example, this is a worker that's been hired to schlep the grapes from the vineyard to wherever they're going. V'amar rachman alechol, and the Torah allows them to eat it. Okay, shor b'mechuber minal. How did you take it as a given that an ox is allowed to eat something that's still connected to the ground? Kal v'chomer me adam. Uma adam she'eino ochel b'tolush. The pasuk doesn't say clearly. We learned it now as a drasha, but the pasuk doesn't say clearly that a human being can eat picked fruit. Yet ochel b'mechuber, shor she'ochel b'tolush. We have already learned that an ox that is threshing is allowed to eat, and that's clearly picked from the ground. So einadin she'ochel b'mechuber. So he certainly kal v'chomer should be allowed to eat from something that's still connected to the ground. Malo adam, no. A human being, if he's a Jew, you have to keep him alive. You don't have to keep an animal alive. So how do we know that an animal can eat mechuber? Well, first of all, let's say maybe a shor mitzvah lachayoso. Maybe you see an ox that's starving. You have to feed him because it's tsar balei chayim. And then kal v'chomer uma adam she'iyata mitzvah chasimaso. A human being, there's no prohibition of muzzling him, but ata mitzvah lachayoso, you're commanded to keep him alive. Sure, shata mitzvah chasimaso. An ox that there's a prohibition to muzzle him. Eino din shata mitzvah lachayoso. The Gemara says no. Sha'amar kra v'chei achicha imach. You have to keep your brother alive. Achicha v'lo shor. Ela shor b'mechuber minal. We back to the question: how do we know that a shor can eat from produce that's connected to the ground? Amar kra reyacha shtei pa'amim im eino inyan La'adam b'mechuber, those psukim are talking about you, a worker that's allowed to eat. And if we don't need it for produce that's connected to the ground, because we learned it from a different way, today in l'shor b'mechuber, teaches us that an ox can also eat from the ground. Ravina Omar, loy adam b'tolush, the low shor b'mechuber tzrika kroy. A human being able to eat picked fruit and a short being able to eat b'mechuber do not need psukim. D'chsiv, lo sachsom shor b'disho. Don't muzzle an animal. And then we'll see how the limud takes us tomorrow. So tomorrow, Surah Rabbanon is at 8:15.
Yeah,
And DAf Yomi will be at 6:45.
very good. All right, good night.
Night.
Go ahead.